We are looking at some wisdom from Jesus that I believe we all need, especially if we want to be influential, if we want to be helpful, if we want to be light in a dark world. How do we do that in a way? How do we share perspective? How do we represent truth and so on in a way that actually helps people want to engage it, want to hear it, as opposed to be like, no thanks, or worse, right? Because what we're gonna be talking about today in our series, Record Scratch, is just how to represent good things, truth and perspective well. And Record Scratch is all about different statements that Jesus made that make you go, wait a minute, did he really just say that? And this one especially, it seems a little offensive. That's why I have this little pig up here with pearls, because Jesus is gonna talk about pigs and pearls, and it sounds like he's calling people pigs, and who's he calling pigs, and all of that. But his point, as we're gonna see, isn't about calling people pigs. It's actually about us. If we have truth, if we have perspective, which all of us do, no matter where you're at in your journey with Jesus, whether you know Jesus or not, we all have things to share and good things to share that would be helpful if people could hear them, right? I mean, let's take spiritual stuff out of it. Even just, you may know people and who are always in financial stress and all that, and you just wish they'd be open to a little bit, like just maybe don't spend so much money, or maybe don't go into debt for a $80,000 car if you make $40,000 a year, or whatever it is, right? Or you just have some perspective, or relational perspective, or spiritual stuff too, even more, right? Because people are so sensitive right now that to share anything, it just feels like people are like, dude, you do you, I'll do me. I don't want to hear it. I'm good, and all that, right? And that's true of everything. But for those of us who care about things like what the Bible calls the gospel, which is the good news that God brought through Jesus, that we can have a relationship with him. Jesus came into the world to make it possible for that to happen, for our sins to be forgiven, and that we could walk into a whole new life as he begins to change us and transform us. I mean, we know every single human, if they could just understand that, would be life-changing for eternity for them. And you and I have that, but also the responsibility to share that. But how do we do that in a world that's pretty sensitive, that really doesn't want to hear a whole lot? How do we represent Jesus well? Because we all know Christians who don't, who sort of chase people the other way. In fact, that's really easy to do right now because of the sensitivity. It can either make you, on one hand, go like, you know what, I'm just not gonna say anything to anybody. Because if I do, it's just gonna make them upset. People are so sensitive, I'm just not gonna say anything. That's one way to go. Another way to go is be like, you know what, I'm just gonna share anyway, because even if they don't want to hear it, they should want to hear it, and I'm just gonna say it. If they get offended, well, shame on them. I'm just gonna say it. And you probably know people like that. Some of you may be people like that. I talk to some people after each service like, yeah, I'm one of those. I get it, right? Because you really care, you want to share. But both of those are counterproductive. And what Jesus is gonna do is show us a better way of how we can be influential and sensitive at the same time in a way that leaves people wanting more and it helps people take some significant steps. And that's gonna get us to our statement today. That, again, at first hearing, is a record scratch statement. It's pretty offensive. Matthew 7:6, here's what he says. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. That's why we have a pearl with pigs on it. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So he's saying like the things that are sacred, like sacred truth and good things that we have to share, they're valuable like pearls. And he's saying, okay, don't give them to dogs and to pigs. And you think, well, wait a minute, who's he calling a dog and who's he calling a pig? Like, is he really doing that? Is he really calling people dogs and pigs? Like, is he saying, okay, you have this good stuff, but don't share it with these pigs and these, dogs? Like, why would Jesus call, people that? And that's offensive now. I mean, if I called you a pig or a dog, you probably wouldn't think, oh, thank you. But 2,000 years ago, even more so, when Jesus was teaching this originally, in his culture, like pig, that was the worst thing you could call somebody in that culture. because this was a Jewish audience, and Jews considered pigs to be unclean animals, like spiritually unclean animals. And therefore they didn't eat pork. Like they didn't know the glory of bacon. Can you believe that? They didn't know the glory of a pulled pork sandwich or anything like that. They didn't eat pigs. And they saw pigs being raised in that culture, but it was always raised for Gentiles, like Roman soldiers and so on. So to be called a pig was a really big thing didn't get much worse than that. Similarly with dogs. I mean, again, most of us wouldn't want to be called a dog either, but 2,000 years ago, even more so. I mean now, let me show you my dog. This is Chewy. I haven't shown him in a while. He's actually gonna make an appearance possibly this Christmas at our Christmas service. But Chewy's an amazing little guy, amazing little dog. I love Chewy. And I sleep with Christy and I sleep with Chewy every night, And some of you, if you're a dog person and I talk about, Chewy's in our, Chewy's in our bed, we sleep with Chewy. If you're a dog person, you're like, well, of course. But if you're not a dog person, right, you're like, oh man, I gotta get another church. This guy, I knew he's crazy. I gotta go find a real pastor or somebody, and because you're not a dog person. Well, 2,000 years ago, nobody was a dog person. 2,000 years ago, dogs weren't pets. I mean, the very wealthy maybe had, but it was just not a thing. Dogs were running around everywhere. They would pack up, cause problems. So to be called a dog now, we think dog, a lot of us think, aw, but nobody thought, aw, that way, right? So to be called a dog or a pig was even worse than it is now. And so you think, okay, now, so what is Jesus saying? I mean, it's what Jesus is saying, okay, we've got this precious truth about God, these precious spiritual truths, and we live in a world that doesn't appreciate us and doesn't appreciate them. So you know what? Phooey on them. Don't just as a believer, you've got these wonderful truths, but people are dogs and they're pigs, and therefore you're wasting your time and don't even bother with them. Now, you can actually go online, you can Google this and find sermons. If you Google sermons on this passage, and easily find sermons that say exactly what I just said. But as you might guess, gross misinterpretation of the passage and what Jesus was saying. Not at all what Jesus was saying. So, what was Jesus saying? Well, here's one of the basic rules of Bible study when you study the Bible is context. Is that every text has a context. And therefore, you don't separate a statement out of its context and then try to make a meaning of it. You interpret it in light of its context. Just like in conversation. Like, I'm sure this has happened to you where you've said something and you had a little statement as part of a bigger conversation, and somebody pulled that little statement out of context and said, well, they said da-da-da. You're like, that's not at all what I meant. And same thing with the Bible. As we interpret the Bible, we interpret it in context, not by itself. So what's the context of the passage? Well, this is part of the Sermon on the Mount, which is this sermon that Jesus gave, in a section of that sermon where he's talking about mistakes religious people make with each other, and even more importantly, with those outside of the faith. And for example, last week, Eric did such an incredible job talking about this. The passage just before our passage. I mean, we're part of the same passage right now as Eric talked about last week, which if you weren't here, the passage where Jesus says, don't judge lest you want to be judged the same way. And if there's a speck in somebody's eye and you've got a big plank in your eye, maybe deal with that first. And so he's talking about hypocrisy and the wrong kind of judgmentalism. And religious people are really good at doing that, right? Right? And this is part of that conversation, mistakes religious people make. It's the very next passage. It's the very next verse. It's part of the same thought. And so what he's concerned about is not something about the hearers, but the truth deliverers. He's trying to get us to understand something, not so much a statement about them. And what we're gonna see is that the point is not about the unworthiness of the pigs, but the unhelpfulness of the pearls to pigs right now. Pearls are valuable to us, but have no value to pigs. Meaning, be sensitive to the receptivity and where somebody is on the journey, Don't just share your stuff regardless, but share it with a sensitivity to how much, what can they, like, is this helpful to them or not? Is this wanted by them or not? Am I just a pearl pusher and push my pearls on them no matter what? Or is there a better way? So let's think about it a little bit. The image that Jesus was using. So he's talking about feeding pigs. Now you might think, because I'm from Alabama, that I used to feed pigs every day because that's what you do in Alabama. Just like some of you came here from California to Texas, or you came from New York or somewhere else to Texas, and some of you I know thought we all walk around with cowboy hats and cowboy boots, and right? And then you get here and you think, oh man, there's none of that. And some of you maybe even bought a cowboy hat, and then it's like, oh man, when am I gonna wear that? And because that's not true. Same thing in Alabama. We didn't grow up feeding pigs. At least I didn't. I'm sure some people do, but I didn't. But I've seen it. I've seen pigs really hungry, want to be fed. I've also raised 2 teenage boys. So I understand when they're hungry and when, and all that, you better get out of the way once you put the food down. Pigs the same way, right? Some of you have seen pigs being fed. You call the pigs and the pigs come, and they're not, passive. They're not just walking and saying, oh, well, this should be nice. I wonder what's for dinner. Right, they're coming in, they're coming in, and so that's the picture, right? These pigs are coming in, now we'd use a trough, or then they would put it on the ground. And what Jesus is saying is, okay, these hungry pigs that are coming looking for food, and they're hungry, and you throw down pearls, as valuable as they are, the pigs are not gonna appreciate it. They don't know what to do with pearls. They're looking for slop. They're looking for food. And you could say, well, you ungrateful pigs, these pearls are so much more valuable than what you're looking for, right? And that may be true, but it's just not helpful. They're not at a place where they can appreciate it. It's not so sensitive to the pigs. Let me take another analogy. So Christmas is coming up, right, in a few months. And let's say you've got a 6-year-old boy in your home and a 16-year-old girl. Okay, that's a pretty big span, but let's say that's what you got. So you have this 6-year-old little boy and 16-year-old girl. And Christmas morning, the tree is there, the presents are under the tree, the 6-year-old is so excited, it's time to open gifts. He's been dreaming about it all night. And there's 6 huge packages wrapped with his name on it, like big packages. And he's thinking, oh man, what's in there? This is gonna be amazing. What kind of toys? This is just incredible. And he's excited, and you're excited too, because you know exactly what you got him. You got him a 6-piece set of Louis Vuitton luggage. You spent $40,000. It's really valuable, at least, right? And you think, wow, this is $40,000 of luggage, and this is so valuable and all that. Who wouldn't want a full set of Louis Vuitton luggage? A 6-year-old little boy wouldn't want it, right? And so the 6-year-old boy opened, and there's luggage. And he's saying, well, maybe there's something in the luggage and it's empty. And he'd be dejected, not because there's not some value, but it's not appreciated by a 6-year-old little boy. But you still have a 16-year-old girl, and there's nothing under the tree for her. And she's a little disappointed, wondering what's going on. And you say, oh, well, you just got your license. Your gift is not under the tree. It wouldn't fit. Your gift is in the garage. Oh my goodness, she starts to cry. You're the best parents ever. This is amazing and all that. And so you all go out to the garage, and sure enough, right there in the garage is this shiny, new, red lawnmower. And she's dejected, but no. This way you can start a little business, and you can earn money, and you can buy yourself a car, which may be a great idea, but at the time, not so appreciated, right? And what Jesus is saying with don't throw pearls to pigs, it's about the pearls. It's about the truth. It's about how we engage. Just saying, hey, let's be sensitive as we share wonderful things with people to make sure that it'll be wonderful to them. That we're not pearl pushers. We don't just push our way in. We don't just say it. But we do so being sensitive to the hearer. Because we all know what it's like to be on the other side of a pushy person, right? Like, If you play golf, this has probably happened to you. If you played a lot of golf, I used to play a lot of golf. And so whenever you play golf, eventually you'll be paired up with somebody who fancies themselves as a golf instructor who loves to give out tips, swing tips and so on. And usually they're like a 15 handicap or a 20 handicap, which is not good, okay? And so you're playing and you just want to just escape from life a little bit, play golf, and every time you get up, to the ball, they're like, hey, you're too upright, get more athletic, or man, your swing's too far inside, you're gonna have to come over the top, or whatever it is. And you just wanna say, you know what, can we just chill out on giving me golf tips? Like, I just wanna play golf. I didn't come here for a lesson. Maybe I know I need a lesson, I'll go get a lesson, but right now, let's just do that, right? Or maybe you have a friend who's like really into nutrition, and you got a group, maybe your life group or whatever, you go out to an ice cream place and they're across the thing from you. And of course they didn't order it, they got water. And you've got your, and they're looking at you like, really, two scoops? With hot fudge, whipped cream, really? You just see it, just take all the fun out of it. You're like, oh, come on. And again, that's what Jesus is saying. It's just, hey, if we really do care about truth, then we need to care about how we deliver that truth in a way that people can be receptive and sensitive to that. Another way to say this, talk about it, is the law of supply and demand. Is my supply of perspective, truth, whatever, does it match the demand on the other side? And let's try to balance that out. Meaning if there's demand, okay, share it. If there's not, don't. If there's a little demand, share a little bit. If there's a lot demand, share a lot. But be sensitive to that. And now this is true of all things, not just spiritual things. I'm learning this lesson as a parent of adult children. They're not children anymore, they're adults. So I'm a parent of adults now. And when they were little, I didn't worry too much about, how receptive they were when they were little. Right? Because they were kind of receptive to everything. Because everything when they were little, I was a genius. And then they become a teenager, I become a total idiot. Now I'm somewhere in between, sometimes genius, sometimes idiot. But you have to gauge, okay, just because I have an idea or I have something to share may not be the time to share it. Or how do I do that in a way that matches demand? It's a law of supply and demand. That's certainly true of spiritual things. Like even something as wonderful as Jesus, and the fact, in all that Jesus wants for us, and that we can have a relationship with God, not based on what we do, but what Jesus has done. It's a gift, and all that God wants to do. We have the most incredible news to share. And Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And you can see it. Wow, if they just knew Jesus, if they just knew the truth, they would be so free. They'd be free from shame, from guilt, from loneliness, from just self-centeredness, or whatever it is. Like you can see, man, it'd be so much better. Right? We just want to it all out there. But what Jesus is saying, okay, just be careful. If you care about truth and you care about them, just be sensitive. Now, the rest of the New Testament talks a good bit about this. How do we share about spiritual things, Jesus? And this is true even if you're not a Christian yet. You're on a journey. There's some things that you've learned that would be helpful, right? But certainly for those of us who know Jesus, this is a big deal. And we feel responsible to how do we represent Jesus well and share and invite people and all that. How can we get this right? Paul talks a lot about this with the churches and the letters in the New Testament. Peter is one that we're going to focus on that does the same thing. So Peter was one of the 12 disciples that would have been there with the crowds at the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus said, don't throw your pearls to pigs, don't give what is sacred to dogs. He heard all that. And he's going to apply that when he writes to Christians in Rome when Christianity was brand new. And when I say Rome, he was writing 1 Peter and 2 Peter, the two letters that he wrote in the New Testament, to Christians in the metroplex of Rome, at the epicenter of the Roman Empire. Christianity, totally new and totally strange and totally weird. It was a pre-Christian culture. And these were new Christians. They wanted to represent Jesus well and share Jesus with their friends in a pre-Christian culture that saw Christianity in some cases as just weird, in other cases as dangerous. Because the Caesars and all that, they did not like Christianity because Christians didn't do things like worship the emperor as a god and so on. And so there was a lot of slander about Christians. And so all that was swirling around, right? So how can you be influential? And you've got this truth to share, but in a pre-Christian culture. And you know why that's so helpful to us? We don't live in a pre-Christian culture. We live in a post-Christian culture increasingly, which is actually a little bit harder because people think they know what Christianity is and they're turned off by it. The truth is they really haven't, in many cases, been exposed to genuine Christianity, and we have the opportunity to do that. But in a post-Christian culture, it'd be difficult. So how do we do it if we want to be influential? And I bet you can think of people in your life, maybe children or siblings or parents or friends or coworkers. Like, how can I represent Jesus well? Well, Peter talks about it with those Christians all throughout the book, but we're just going to focus on 2 verses, kind of the punchline of what he's talking about in the passage. And here's what he says, so helpful. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. So when he says everyone, he's talking about everyone outside the faith. So how do we engage people in a way that helps people see the value and encounter it and all that? 3 principles out of this. I just think it's incredibly helpful. The first one is live a compelling life. He says, be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks, which means that you've created a sense of pull. You know, Jesus is talking about being a pearl pusher, pushing what you believe on other people. And trying to impact people with push is gonna get pushed back. Nobody wants a pushy person. What he's talking about instead is live a life that creates a sense of pull, that makes people wanna know more. Like, what is your deal? Why do you live that way? Why do you love that way? That's compelling. So much so they're actually curious. They wanna know. You're creating demand by the way that you're living your life. I mean, think about the golf illustration. It's one thing if a 20 handicapper wants to give me golf advice, but if I'm on the range and Tiger Woods comes up behind me and is like, hey, can I just share with you one thing that I think would really be helpful? I'm not gonna say no, right? He's compelling. He's the best golfer, you know, could be best golfer in the world, certainly, you know, ever in history. You could argue that, but he's certainly one of the best golfers in history. And yeah, of course, I mean, man, every bit of time you'll give me, Tiger, I'm in. Like, I wanna hear everything. Now, marriage advice, I might look elsewhere, but that's okay. Love you anyway, but you know, golf, you bet. I'm gonna hear everything I can from you because it's compelling. And what he's saying is live a compelling life. It doesn't mean perfect life. It means an authentic, growing, transforming life where part of it is being honest about where we're all screwed up and humble about it. That's part of it. But also loving the way Jesus calls us to love. Like he said, this is the way people know you're my disciples if you love people the way I love you, which is radical. And if you and I just did that, if we just love people with Jesus kind of love in a self-centered world, we would create a lot of demand. I mean, a lot of people say, why do you do that? Why are you doing this for me? Why are you that generous? How can you just forgive like that? I mean, who's that gracious? Like, how can you be that gracious? And how can you be that patient? That's what love is, all that. And so just by doing that, create demand. So he's saying, man, let's just make sure that we live a life that's creating demand, that as we're growing, as we're transforming, as we're loving. And then the next thing the next principle is be ready to share. That's exactly what he says, be ready to share. When people ask, you know, what's the reason for the hope that you have? Meaning hope is what drives our life. Like, what is it that's driving your life? Like, why are you the way you are? In a good way, like, you know, when the rest of the world's freaking out, you're not. Like, you're at peace. Like, why? Or how can you be that loving, like we just said? Or how can you be that gracious? How can you be that forgiving? How can you, where people actually want to know? And then he says, so then be ready to share. Sometimes people will out and out ask, other times you just sense openness and curiosity and match, that's demand. And so then know how to share the supply. Be ready to share. And one thing I wonder about is what percentage of Christians are actually ready to share about Jesus and about what he's done for us and what it means for us to know him and how that can happen. And I don't know the answer to that. It's something I've been thinking about a good bit. When I was on study break, when I go away on study break, I pray. I also talk to people too, but pray about, man, God, what is it that you want to inject in the life of our church this year? And one of those things I felt really strongly about this year is, man, I want to make sure we're all ready to share our faith. Because I'm not sure how many Christians are. And so, the next series, we've got a couple more weeks of this series, but then we start a new series called Ripple Effect. And 1 week of that will be, how do we talk about Jesus? How do we share our faith in a way, realizing that God has placed us all over the place, scattered us wherever we are, in our school, neighborhood, work, wherever we live, work, play, for a reason. And how can we represent Jesus well? And how do we do that? So we'll talk about that. But be ready to share. And then when we do share, to share with gentleness and respect. That you and I should be the most gentle, meaning sensitive, respectful, humble people on the planet. It's not about just, I'm gonna say something whether you wanna hear it or not. That it's not about being pushy, again. It's that when we do share, let's make sure we do so with gentleness and respect and humility, which means it's a dialogue. It's not just a one-way conversation. Be quiet, let me tell you what you need to think. But we actually dialogue and we listen, because they may have something, and they do have something to teach us. And they're the expert of their story. They're the expert of their journey. And so of course we should dialogue and we should listen and when we engage. And that way it keeps the conversation open rather than shutting things down, right? And let me give an example of that. And this is in the category of what not to do, but that often happens. Now we'll share in the next series some things to do and some good illustrations, but this is one that illustrates what Jesus was saying. It's not such a good way to avoid. So I have a good friend who is not a Christian, but he's open to Christianity. In fact, he would say he would love to believe Christianity. He just has a hard time because there's 2 or 3 things that are just significant questions he has that he's still trying to answer. And they're good questions. And some of you are in that mode too. And just let me help you know that here, those are honored. I mean, I get it. Christianity is big. There's a lot to take in. And so of course there's gonna be, hey, wait a minute, I don't know about this or that, or you gotta work things out. Well, that's where he's at. So, and we're good friends. And so a while back he reached out and he said, hey, I need to tell you about a conversation I had with a Christian. I was like, okay. And I could tell it wasn't so great by just his tone and all that. And he said, yeah, he met this guy in a business setting who wanted to meet with him about a business thing. So hey, let's go to lunch. And so about this business thing. Well, they get to lunch and the guy doesn't want to talk about a business thing. This is a Christian who wants to talk about Jesus. So that already sets my friend off because it's a bait and switch, right? You said we're gonna talk about this, but here you go. And then he starts his spiel. He's got like a set presentation, and I'm sure it was all true and good and all that. And he's just sharing his presentation about Jesus, right? Just sharing the deal. My friend, who's very direct, stops him and about halfway through and says, hey, you know what? You're giving me the sales pitch for Christianity, all about Jesus dying on the cross, raising from the dead. Here, I get it. I've heard that sales pitch hundreds of times. I could give it the same. I could give the pitch. I'm just gonna stop you because you just need to know I'm open. I would love to believe all that. There's just some things that make it hard for me to believe that I'm trying to work through. And at this point, the guy does great. He says, ask a question, beautiful. He says, okay, I would love to know what would keep you from believing. And yeah, what are those things? Great question. So he begins to share them. And as he does, the Christian on the other side gets impatient. This is where it goes south. He gets impatient. He loses gentleness. He loses respect. And after a while, it's just too much for him. He doesn't want to hear it anymore. And so he just blurts out, you know what? All these things that you're saying, questions about Christianity, they're not even real. They're just a smoke screen because you know the truth and you refuse to believe it. And he said, in one day, you're gonna realize, you're gonna look back, and he had a very paternalistic attitude, like, when somebody pats you on the head kind of thing without doing that. He said, one day you'll look back, and I hope it's not in hell, and you'll realize how stupid these objections are. So my friend, who is direct, Here's what he did. He got up, got some cash, put it on the table for lunch. Lunch was over. Puts it on the table, looks at this guy and says, thank you. Except he didn't say thank you. He said blank you. You can fill in the blank. This is church. I get in trouble enough around here without doing that. And but he did. That's the way the conversation ended. And so I think what Jesus is helping us with is how do we interact with people in a way, even sharing something as good about Jesus, like Jesus, in a way where we don't get blank you, but thank you. And really, it's about being sensitive. It's just loving to do this, but being sensitive to where people are. And not to be pearl pushers, but to match the law of supply and demand, and to be gracious and respectful and everything that we've been saying. And you can imagine, right, if you live a compelling life and you're ready to share, supply with their demand that matches, and you do that respectfully over time in a relationship, well, that's probably gonna work out pretty well, right? There's a lot of wisdom in what God's saying here. And I think another thing that really helps us is to realize, hey, we don't have to close the deal. We don't have to force anything. It's just one conversation or whatever in a bigger scheme of what God is up to. Because he asks us just to be faithful, but he's the one that actually is the one responsible for people's journey. He's the one that are drawing people to himself. That's what Paul talks about when he writes to Christians in another part of the Roman Empire, in Corinth, in 1 Corinthians. He said this, because people were kind of thinking he was such a big shot, or this other guy, leader named Apollos, was a big shot. And he's like, we're not big shots. He said this, we are only God's servants through whom you believe the good news. Each of us did the work God gave us. I planted the seed in your hearts and Apollos watered it, but it was God who made it grow. It's not important who does the planting or who does the watering. What's important is that God is the one who makes the seeds grow. Meaning he's the one at work. He's the one creating spiritual interest. He's the one pulling people to himself. The one who plants and the one who waters work together with the same purpose. Well, here's what we need to remember. We don't have to force anything. We have to close anything, the deal or anything like that. All we have to do is, in that relationship, as we're sensitive, do our part, realizing that God is the one that's got the big picture. And he's using all kinds of people in people's lives. And therefore, we can just say, hey, you know what? I may just be planting little seed. And maybe I don't see anything happen. I wonder if anything happened. Like even when we invite somebody and they say no, like to Christmas or whatever, like, well, so much for that. You have no idea what's going on. That may be one of 10 invitations that eventually gets them to, you know what? I should do that. Or one conversation, and you think nothing happens in that conversation, and you have no idea. As that's in there, it's a seed that's in their head and that in their heart that God begins to grow. And then, or maybe you're watering something that's already there, and then somebody else comes and waters and you still don't see any growth, but eventually, something comes up. And you may never see it, but you may have been part of the process. So you and I hope we care enough about people that we love, people in our lives, to be helpful in every way. But certainly, when we have the good news about Jesus, or even if you're not a Christian yet, and you're like, yeah, but I'm on a journey, I'm learning some things, great. Then, man, wouldn't we want to be helpful? And Jesus saying, yeah, be helpful, but don't make the mistakes that religious people make. You know, Jesus is a great example of that. They called him a friend of sinners. Why? Because he was. And he was able to relate to people that were nothing like him in a way that they wanted to hang with him, and he wanted to hang with them, and he did. Did he point people to truth over time? Of course he did, in relationship. But it's in the context of sensitivity, relationship, love, and all that, and what a great model. And so what I want us to do is I want us to think about somebody in our life. I want you to think about one person, and you say, man, I would love to be influential any way I could. And I get it. It's like, hey, none of us are Jesus, none of us are perfect, but we do have wonderful news about Jesus, who is perfect and who has, wonderful things that would be great to happen in people's lives. And so I want you to think about just one person. I know some of you can think about 10, but let's think about one. Could be a coworker, person at school, person on your team, person in a neighborhood, golf club, whatever. Family. And just think, okay, God, and we're gonna pray. and ask God to continue to work in their heart and life, and then give us wisdom as to, okay, God, what is my part? What would it look like for me to be faithful and to do that well? And not push them away, but actually be part of what you're doing and pulling people to them. So let's bow our heads together in prayer. God, thank you that we're here because you've used people in our lives. And would you help us to be helpful, to share light in a dark world? And now I'm gonna ask you to pray yourself and just talk to God in your own words, in your own heart. And maybe just name that person that God has put on your mind. You say, God, I know you know this person and you love them more than I can even understand. You care for them. There's so much you want for them. And I know you're at work in their life, even if I can't see it. But God, would you help me know what my part is? Would you help me be helpful, not counterproductive, but productive? Would you help me be sensitive to where they're at and to be able to share in a way that can maybe help them maybe that can plant a seed or that can water something that's already there and that you can use to grow their spiritual progress. Father, I do pray that you'd use all of us in this world because the world is dark, but you came as the light of the world to point the way to all that you want for us. We thank you for your love. In Jesus' name, amen.